Welcome. Earlier today, I began a conversation about the importance of men, of boys, of the male role models, of the masculine frame in society today, and how important it is to redirect some of our attention to the plight of young boys. I decided today to talk about such an issue because of my experience and because of what I am observing across society. And particularly in my interactions with people, loved ones, those who are close to me and those who are not as close, and those who I interact with, either on a daily basis or sporadically. And my observation has been that you meet the average young girl today, let's assume she's 7 or 8, or let's say she's 15 or 13. You look into her eyes and you see confidence. She's been raised and nurtured to be confident. You can see that so much love, affection, admiration has been poured into her subconscious mind from a young age. I look into the eyes of a boy of the same age or in the same age group, and the longer I stare into his eyes, I see despair. I see emptiness. I see no hope. I see fear. Most of the time it's been a product of what he has observed, learned. Sometimes it's the absence of a father, someone to play with in his life. Now let me start by saying that in England and in Great Britain, I could extend that to the whole of the United Kingdom, but I'm not very familiar with the statistics or the data in Northern Ireland. So I think the Northern Irish data is slightly different to the Scottish, the Welsh and the English data, which are more in keeping with each other. But when I look across the whole of Great Britain, my observation is that we have a crisis of manhood, both amongst men who are mature and young boys. A lot of the young boys have been raised in families, and this is an interesting statistics. If you exclude the baby boomers and the baby boomer generation, and if you exclude much of Generation X, 80% of all kids being born today are either being born to single parent families, particularly single mothers, and certainly are being born into relationships where the man and the woman were unmarried. Unmarried relationships or unmarried situations certainly has increased over the past few years for a number of reasons. At the core of this is the fact that we have our social mores and the decorums, the values, the traditional mannerisms and etiquettes and principles that we once had, some of which were passed down from our Judeo Christian values, some of which came as part of the Enlightenment and Western civilization, we have started to lose some of those gifts, some of those assets. And so today, most young men and most young women are being born to families where there is no father. The average length of an unmarried couple, in terms of the length of the relationship, is about 3 to 4 years in England. There are some variations at the margins, but that is the average duration. The average duration of people who actually get married is about 7 years. What we find is that most of the time, when fathers are not committed to the mothers through either a state marriage or a religious marriage or a proclamation, a declaration in the public and in front of people they love, and especially when the men are not ready to have or become fathers, they tend to disappear from the lives of the children. Some other times they are pushed away because of the way the system is set up. The family courts are very biased towards mothers and very adverse towards fathers. 90+% of all custodial cases in the United Kingdom are awarded to mothers. I have no intention of going into the stats or the details, but the point is there is a crisis amongst men. There is a crisis amongst our boys. Most of these boys are being raised by women, obviously their mothers, who love them, but also who have had horrible experiences with the men they loved or the men that they lay with. And some of that frustration is passed down in words, in gestures, in statements made to the hearing of these boys. Some of those statements could be, all men are useless. Your father was useless. You were going to be just like your father. I don't trust men. Men are no good. I'm strong, I'm independent, and I do not need a man. As a result of having no role models to emulate, and the constant hearing of all the attacks on the masculine frame or the male image, some of these boys find themselves in the valley of despair, confused, lost, fearful, not aware of who they could become, because the frame they're supposed to emulate has been on a daily basis painted as the villain, the devil. Some of these boys grow up, and when they get to 18 and 19, they go into the universities and colleges, and what they hear is even worse. From their liberal teachers, they hear about the patriarchy, the oppression women have had to endure, the fact that men are no good, and all we care about is power. And these men, who are now young men, start to feel as though they would like to peel off the skin that they have, which is the masculine frame, and they believe some of what they've heard. As a result of that, they live up, or they live down in this case, to the expectations set by the women they love and the women who have guided them. Now, most people are not aware that in the academic institutions, about 80% in the United Kingdom, generally speaking, when you go through preschool, school, and college, and up to college, are women. So these boys are raised by mothers, single mothers, no fathers in the house, They are sent to schools taught by mainly women, and in the 20%, sometimes more, depending on location, depending on whether it's in England, Wales, or Scotland, or even the Northern Ireland. The men who were there are the small percentage of men, almost 70% of that group, are very feminine men. There is no masculinity. These are men who have been raised by feminist mothers and indoctrinated in the same way, made to feel to be ashamed, told that their emotions are toxic and how everything about men is toxic. And so what you find is that these boys are being raised in a feminine environment, which is why you find a lot of boys finding solace in structure, whether that structure comes from the bad sources, gangs, groups, whether that structure comes from bad people. They gravitate to the nearest source of leadership, because for all of their lives, they have never come across leadership. Some of them will never find any form of structure, and they become incels. They become introverts. They dive deep into video games, some of which are violent video games. They dive deep into the metaverse. They dive deep into virtual reality and artificial intelligence and coding. They dive deep into STEM fields, which makes them even more socially awkward and therefore unable to interact with the world, unable to control their emotions, never having been given the opportunity to be part of a group, either sports, martial arts, charity, joining the choir, supporting the local community. And therefore, there's a resentment that is built. And someday in the future, what we see is violence. It has to stop. It has to stop because each of us, men and women, need one another, and all of us need each of us. A country, a society, a community is only as good as the best people that it can develop, but it's also held back by the weakest links. Now think about the concept. If you have kids, and those who have kids, toddlers, they might relate to this analogy. If you've ever gone for a walk with the family, the two parents and the kids, or younger ones, you have to walk at the pace of the slowest person. Except one parent decides to carry the slowest person and therefore walks at a faster pace. So if we all move together as a group, as a community, and as a country, we cannot leave anyone behind. The infrastructure that has created and built much of Western civilization, the infrastructure that runs all of what we see on a daily basis and things we do not see, were built by men. The whole concept that this world was built by men is not something we say to irritate women. It shouldn't be an irritation. After all the men are birthed by women. It's about choosing what you see. I'm reminded of the story of two people in a prison. One looks through and outwardly through the prison bars and sees a beautiful sunset. He beckons on his cellmate to look out of the window, and all the other person can see are the steel frames that holds him in bondage. Two different perspectives. In any case, society is built by men. The infrastructure has been built and for many, many years has been run by men. Yes, we want the opportunity for all sexes to be able to participate in the maintenance of said infrastructure. But until we get to that point, we need to ensure that we have confident, capable, intelligent, conscientious, dutiful men in place, and younger ones who are being raised and taught to run the race and to receive the baton carefully to ensure that the entire infrastructure continues to work. We need boys, not because we care more about boys. We need boys because they are loved, they are needed, and they are important. They are vital, they are essential. And the idea that in society today we cannot esteem young boys is rather sad. It's sad because the unintended consequences of all of these ideologies will come back to roost. The chicken always comes home to roost. It is my hope that whoever you may be, you start thinking about the role you were playing by omission or by commission in the disintegration of the masculine frame. To mothers, and let me say this as delicately as I can, it takes two. Love does not get the job done. I have seen more people raised with so much love, so much protection, turn out to be incredible failures in life. And I have seen people raised with no love, no affection, no intimacy, turn out to do better in life. If love got the job done, we will not have issues amongst young boys, because love will solve the problem. Love never has been the sole ingredient to the success and the well-being of a child. There's a second part, which is where men come into the picture. We bring in things that we cannot communicate as eloquently as mothers can. We bring in discipline. We bring in structure. We bring in delayed gratification, the most important ingredient for success for young people. We bring in the importance of orderliness, the importance of being dutiful, the importance of conscientiousness, all of which increases the probability that a child will have higher intelligence. Fathers make better parents and create more successful offsprings in the long run than mothers do. Just in the same way as children from a loving two-parent families provide and produce better kids and offsprings than children with single fathers only or single mothers only. The data is clear. Love does not get the job done. Children need love, but they also need discipline. Let me use an analogy. What we have today in society is similar to language. If I were to remove the letter I or the letter O from your vocabulary as an English-speaking person, the average person will lose more than 5,000 words. One vowel removed can affect your ability to communicate and the amount of words you can muster. That is how important one ingredient could be. Similarly, we know when we cook, one ingredient missing, if substantial, can affect the taste of a meal. A mother and a father, a loving mother and a loving father, providing the right ingredients, mixed in the right proportion, will always produce the right outcome. I often use the example, and one I have used many years ago, about water. Water is made up of two components, hydrogen and oxygen. We call it H2O, 2 parts of hydrogen and 1 part of oxygen. Mixed in the right proportion, the compound produced is useful for nourishing your body, is useful for life. You can drink it. It's generally odorless and colorless, mixed in the right proportion. If I drink it, it will nourish me. If, on the other hand, which is what we see in society today, if I decided that things had to be even, things had to be equal, and I chose to mix the composition in an equal manner, 1 part of hydrogen, or let's make it more equal, rather than remove, we add more, 2 parts of hydrogen and 2 parts of oxygen. We have equality, but we create a different compound, H2O2. The colloquial name, or what we call it generally, is hydrogen peroxide. It's odorless, it's colorless, but if I drink it, it would probably kill me. Same initial ingredients, mixed in the right proportion, leads to several unintended consequences which could be fatal. And that is what we are seeing in society today. We are saying one component is not important. We do not need men. We disavow men. We tell them they are not wanted. We ridicule men, and so they leave. And we think we can create the same outcome with one ingredient, or by the law of compensation, where one person, the mother, tries to overcompensate by trying to do 2 things at the same time, or overdosing on love. Love does not get the job done. You need the love of a mother, you need the structure, the vision, the purpose, the discipline of a father. In the right proportion, you produce something that is nourishing, useful for society, and one that will reproduce good effects. Alter the equation, whether by removing the mother or whether by eliminating the father, you create unintended consequences. Now, here are some recommendations and things I do. And these are things I do not just in my family, but things I do when I meet friends and loved ones. I'm usually quite perceptive and attentive to young kids when I meet them. And whenever I come across a child where there is no father, and even I do this with friends who have kids, is I rough them up a little bit, rough and tumble play. I love playing with kids. Get on the floor and play with them. Allow them the ability to learn and express, take risks, push, pull, understand the boundaries, teach them how to communicate whilst playful, whilst in the act, to get what they want, and to also respect the needs of other people. This is particularly vital, especially if you have only children. I have friends, and I know people who have one child. I always say, never go for nothing if you can, but never go for one if you choose to. It has to be 2 and above. More harm is done to children that are raised on their own, especially when there is no much larger community of kids around them, because children are socialized by other children. I find most people that I know who have only children have very narcissistic type tendencies. Now, generally speaking, children think about themselves. Rough and tumble play and roughhousing or rough playing is an opportunity for a child to learn about the emotions of other people, the needs of other people, learn how to give, receive, learn how to negotiate, learn how not to always win, despite the desire to win, by recognizing from the child's perspective that you have to play again. And in order for you to play the second time, both parties have to feel that they have achieved their goals. I have found this to be profoundly useful for a lot of children. Interestingly, I've also found that even amongst people I know who are married, happily married, the men in the families do not roughhouse or rough play or take risks with the children, because the mother's protective nature is always on full alert. It either leads to complaint, an argument with the father or the partner, because she feels something will go wrong. And sometimes they do. But it's so important for the mother to understand that rough play, rough and tumble play, roughhousing, is what keeps most men on the straight and narrow, and most women on the straight and narrow. It's not just about having a father in the house. A father has to play. Now, I have said before in several videos, for most women, most young women, the first time they play with a man is foreplay, because they never got to play with their fathers, a coach, an uncle, a brother. So most women are not aware of the subtle nature of men and how men can be predatory in their approach in the dating scene. A woman who participated at a young age and consistently in rough play with a man, father, uncle, brother, relative, someone in the community, has a much better chance of having a fruitful relationship with a man in the future. The data is coming together and is very clear, because that rough play teaches the woman the nature of a man. It teaches the woman how to take risks. It teaches the woman how she's not very different to a man. Men and women are more alike than we are dislike. It allows the woman to express herself, and that innate nature of her, which is both aggressive, adventurous, and strong. For boys, it teaches boys how to express and not withhold and suppress the emotion they have. The call to adventure, it teaches boys the importance of winning, and not always winning at every instance or winning at all costs. It teaches boys how to control their emotions, to understand their strength, and to keep that strength controlled It teaches boys not to go from extremes, from one extreme emotion to the other, how to manage your strength when you're angry. Men in the house, and fathers who play with their kids, or men in the community who play with the young kids, play a role that is not understood. They keep those young men on the straight and narrow, and therefore minimize the likelihood that those men will be drug dealers, rapists, those who commit antisocial atrocities, that keep them away from being violent, and consequently, they keep those young men away from prisons. For the women, they keep the women away from having children too young, becoming single mothers, engaging in acts which some of our ancestors will be shameful towards, such as selling your body for compensation openly. We've redefined prostitution these days. We used to call it prostitution, and I should say this, I really don't care what people do with their bodies. More power to you. I think prostitution should be legal on moral grounds, because it's your body, you get to choose. On a societal ground, I'm adverse to decentralizing, deregulating, and making the sexual marketplace transactional from a societal, social perspective. But as an individual, more power to you. We'll redefine prostitution in several terms. We call it porn these days, or porn star. Isn't it interesting? We've called prostitutes porn stars, movie stars. We're glorifying things that we never used to. A good example would be those who are obese. Rather than call them obese, we call them BBL, big and beautiful. You know, the idea that you have to apply a qualification suggests that something is wrong. I never hear young, attractive men call themselves slim and beautiful, or slim and handsome. We just call them men. In any case, we've seen the relabeling of behaviors that were not socially acceptable by women into terms that are now acceptable. We talk about OnlyFans. You ask a lot of young girls, what do you do these days? And they say OnlyFans. I do not hear men who sell products on Amazon or eBay call themselves Amazons or Amafans or eBayers. I hear online business, online advertising. I hear sales. I hear marketing. We've created a different spectre of qualifications and terminologies for women's poor behaviors. Again, there's a correlation between the absence of a father and the likelihood a woman will be pregnant at a young age, will become a single mother, will become loose, and could easily become the village bicycle, all because she never got the opportunity and the love of a father, and therefore is always seeking for that love from another man. She never got to play with a man, and a man she loved, in a safe environment, and therefore is looking for some form of play. Unfortunately, she goes for foreplay. Fathers provide an important role in the community. It cannot be overstated. Men provide an important role in the community. It should not be overstated. As a matter of fact, I have found that the more we become individuals and we segregate from those small tribes and communities, the more important it is that a father plays a role in the family. And let me explain before I bring today's session to a close. If you go back in time, people stayed in communities where they were raised or born. People stayed amongst their own, and therefore you were raised by the community. You were raised in the streets where there was interaction without invitation. People came into your homes. I knew that for certain. People came into my home, or my father's house, or my family home, without invitation. People saw you on the street, and if you behaved poorly, I was disciplined. Very funny, very fascinating. Growing up, I was careful about not misbehaving outside, even in my father's absence, for fear that someone that knew my father or mother would see me and report to my father. On a number of occasions, I was caught, I was disciplined. They brought me back home and told my parents. My parents said thank you, made them a drink. They had a drink with the guests. When the guests left, I got another set of discipline. And the point of this is that you're raised by the community. Today we've become so integrated, and there are positive reasons for that, and people have migrated away from their base. So in London, you have an apartment building, sometimes 300 flats, and no one interacts with each other other than saying good morning, good evening, good night. Most of the time, no words are exchanged. So if you have one family in one flat, the neighbor next door is not on friendly terms with your family, and therefore they say nothing, because there is no investment in guiding you or trying to put you on the straight and narrow, because your parents probably do not want such intrusion. So the responsibility of parenthood has become more needed, but when you combine that with the fact that the same children go to schools, and in the schools, teachers have been dissolved of all responsibility and discipline. A child can behave in any manner they choose. The school restricts the teachers from providing discipline. So much so now that some schools have people who are supposed to be teachers who have become activists, broken people who are now teaching our children so much awful things that I would say the curse is coming for those people. Karma is a bitch. It will come. There's a saying, raise a child in the way he or she should grow, and when they grow, they never depart from it. Like a sponge, these kids are absorbing very bad ideologies, and therefore, because the parents are not there to provide the support, the father is not there, sometimes the mother is absent, these kids are growing up with the wrong software, and therefore hoping also to change their hardware. It's all a mess. Now let me bring today's session to a close by saying the following. You and I can play a part. It won't be comfortable always. It won't be easy. But we can play a part, because the future and the destiny of our country is under threat. The reason for that threat is the disintegration of our young boys. We need to ensure that we are investing so much more in our boys going forward. I personally think, assuming you had a family of two, a boy and a girl, and you had £100 to invest in both of them, you should be investing roughly 70% in the boy and 30% in the girl. The reason being, that 30% will not affect the girls' underperformance, because the infrastructure, the school system, the support for women is so skewed in their favor in the establishments that they're being supported by more than 50% over and above most boys. But if you add her 30% from the home and the 50% support she's getting from all the other external sources, she still has 80%. It still exceeds the 70% the boy is given. Now, the schools are giving very little to boys, and because of the absenteeism of some of these boys and the lack of being connected or engaged to the schools, you find that at 70% you actually give the boy, at best, will amount to about 50%, because of the inertia, because you're fighting against the lack of enthusiasm, the lack of vision, the lack of wanting to be more, do more, and have more, the lack of role models. It will take at least 3 or 4 decades before that investment imbalance, 70-30, to return back to 50-50. It would take at least 4 decades minimum, and therefore, as a parent, as a teacher, as someone who is in society, pay more attention to the boys. If we can get this done, I think it might protect our bacon in the end.